Every time I show one of these cheap $20 Amazon plated diamond stones, I get the question of whether or not they will also work as flattening stones for other sharpening stones. And the answer is yes, but. The reason people want to know is because dedicated flattening stones can be very expensive. They are typically much larger for flattening and carry much coarser diamonds than that of a sharpening stone. This makes them very expensive. However, a $20 stone like this one, which I'll link below, also works if you're just a hobbyist. Let me show you how these work and some of the downsides. Compromise number 1, size. The first compromise that you're going to have to make is probably the biggest, or lack thereof. These $20 diamond sharpening stones are going to be approximately the same size as the stone you are trying to flatten. However, that doesn't mean that you still can't get good results. You simply need to use an alternating movement pattern as you are flattening, such as the figure 8 pattern, or really any alternating movement pattern where all parts of the stones come into contact with each other, rather than just back and forth. This pattern will ensure that you have minimal bias on all parts of the stone as you are trying to flatten. And doing this gave me a very flat surface on the sharpened Koramaku with the telltale air cushion on the granite surface plate. Even though the Koramaku is a slightly larger stone than the $20 SSATC sharpening stone I used to flatten it with. Compromise number 2, size again, but grit size. Dedicated flattening stones typically use a very coarse grit, much coarser than you would typically find on a sharpening stone. This is for a couple of reasons. 1, the coarser grit removes material faster, especially on very hard stones like ceramic. And while this still can be done on the $20 sharpening stone, be prepared, as it may take a while to remove all of the material in order to make a particular stone flat, especially very hard ceramic stones. 2, the coarser diamond and diamond pattern found on dedicated flattening stones provides more space for the removed material to go. This keeps the stones from clogging with removed material from the sharpening stone. Using a finer sharpening stone for flattening works. Just keep in mind, you will be cleaning out the clogged stone often in order for the stone to continue to cut. Now you may be asking, what about a cheap $20 flattening stone? Well, I bought one. And while the $20 sharpening stone is indeed larger and has a much coarser grit, there's only one problem. It's not really flat. Thing is, it's made up of a couple of thin plated plates, see that 10 times fast, mounted onto a plastic base using some magnets. Like so. So with this being a plastic base, I'm not really sure how you're supposed to flatten something when the base itself is always in a state of unknown flatness, depending on what you set it on and the fact that it's not very rigid and has a little bit of memory to it, meaning that it holds its shape if it's bent even in the slightest. Now I suppose that you could modify this by taking these plates, taking the magnets off of them and gluing them to something flat, which in that case you'd have to flatten that something yourself, and you'd have to do all of that and hope that the glue sticks and all that other stuff. Personally, I think that it's probably not worth doing that, because what is your time worth? And you can just buy something for a little bit more money that's already flat and ready to go. So no, I don't think that this is a good value when we're talking about. This thing is kind of all miscombobulated here with these magnets. I just think that you're better off buying something for a little bit more money that's already done and ready to go, unless you're into modifying stuff. But for $20, I think that you're better off just buying the cheap $20 sharpening stone, because not only can you use this, not only is this better for flattening in that it is flat out of the box, you don't have to modify it. It may be smaller and have a little bit finer grit, which we go back to the initial problems that we originally talked about with this variation. But not only can you flatten with it, but you can also sharpen with it, which is something that you can't do on the $20 flattening stone, simply due to the fact that we have much larger gaps in the grit here on the surface, which makes sharpening knives kind of a pain in the butt because the blade itself will actually get stuck in these gaps, and it's not meant for sharpening. Whereas the $20 diamond stone that we have here, while it does take a little bit longer to flatten, you can also use it for sharpening. And kind of going over this here real quick, this is all stuff to just keep in mind because there are different versions of $20 flattening stones and $20 sharpening stones. I'll put a link to some of the stuff below and what I'm using here. But keep this in mind while you're looking at this cheap stuff, is that it's not always consistent and you sometimes never really know what you're getting. This is not what I was expecting. Now, after flattening a bunch of stuff, the diamond grit on these cheap stones holds up well as it should, since flattening stones actually puts less pressure on the diamonds than sharpening does. The only thing to keep in mind is that when flattening, you will be using water, so that can shorten the life of plated stones by rusting the bases underneath the plating. So just make sure that you thoroughly dry the stones between uses. And that's really all I have to say about that. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.